He came to the zoo to honor his daughter's last wish, but grief was still suffocating him. No one expected a gorilla named Emma, who had lost a child herself, to be the one who understood him best. When their eyes met through the glass, something unspoken shattered the silence. But wait until you see how fate turned this quiet moment into a powerful act of healing, and why it left everyone in tears. In the quiet corner of the Cincinnati Zoo, far from the chatter of school field trips and camera shutters, something extraordinary had taken root. A new life. Emma, a 22-year-old Western lowland gorilla, had given birth for the very first time. The delivery was long and difficult, the kind that left even seasoned veterinarians pacing the hallways with tense jaws and clasped hands. But when it was over, when the small, trembling infant finally lay on his mother's chest, a collective breath escaped the team. He was alive, and so was she. From the very beginning, Emma clung to her baby with an intensity that was almost defiant. She didn't scream or panic. She didn't need to. Her message was clear to anyone who came near. Back away. This was hers. And no one, no handler, no zookeeper, no curious eye, would take him. When the staff brought her food, she ignored it unless the person stayed well beyond reach. She never let the baby out of her arms, not for a second, not even in sleep. Emma had never known how to show affection the way some of the others did. She wasn't the playful one. But this was devotion. This was the raw, instinctive love of a mother who had once lost something and vowed never to lose again. That same day, long before the zoo opened to the public, a man appeared by the front gates. His back was slightly bent, his steps measured but proud. His name was Frank Miller, 82 years old, a former postal worker, a widower, and more recently, a father in mourning. 3 months earlier, his daughter Elizabeth, Lizzie as he called her, had passed away in hospice care after a long illness. Visiting the gorillas had been their plan. She'd read every article about Emma's pregnancy. She wanted to see the baby. When she knew she wouldn't make it, she made Frank promise. "Go," she'd whispered, "go and see it for me." So he did. When Frank entered the primate house, a soft morning light filtered through the windows, catching motes of dust in the air like falling stars. A nurse standing near the entrance caught sight of him and quietly radioed to the keeper. Moments later, Tom Haley, the lead primate curator, stepped in and gave a gentle nod. With a silent signal, he ushered the early visitors aside, making space for the man who moved as if carrying something heavy no one else could see. Emma sat curled at the far end of her enclosure, her back rising and falling in slow, deep waves. But the moment Frank stepped closer to the glass, something shifted. Her ears twitched, her head turned slightly. Then, with the grace of something ancient and knowing, she stood. The entire building seemed to pause. Holding her infant in powerful, gentle arms, Emma walked slowly, purposefully across the enclosure. Her eyes never left his. She stopped just inches from the glass, and then, with a slowness that made every breath catch in the room, she lifted the baby. Not high, not for show, just enough to present him, to offer him, directly to the old man on the other side. Frank didn't move, didn't blink. His eyes locked onto the tiny face, the curled fingers, the barely there breath of the child pressed against Emma's chest. His bottom lip trembled, and then soundlessly, tears rolled down his cheeks. Not just sadness, not just memory. It was something deeper, a dam breaking inside a man who hadn't cried at the funeral, who hadn't cried in the hospital, but now couldn't stop. Behind him, the staff froze. No one dared speak. Tom turned away and wiped his eyes. The nurse at the door whispered, "She knows." She felt what he lost. And in that silence, as a gorilla showed her newborn to a grieving father, the room filled with something no camera could capture, something sacred, something human. After the moment had passed, after Emma lifted her child to the glass and Frank's tears had fallen quietly onto the floor, the room began to stir again. A few visitors whispered softly, some walked away wiping their eyes, and the nurse by the entrance gave Tom a look that said, "Should we step in?" But Tom shook his head gently. Something was still happening, something unspoken. Frank hadn't moved. He remained exactly where he stood, as if his feet had rooted themselves to the floor. One hand rested on the railing in front of the glass. His posture was calm but unmoving, like he feared that stepping away would dissolve the fragile thread that had formed between them. And across the barrier, Emma remained too. Her dark, steady eyes never left his. For nearly 20 minutes, they simply looked at each other, not with curiosity, not with fear, but with something more profound: recognition. At some point, Emma shifted her weight and slowly lowered herself onto the straw-covered floor. With quiet grace, she settled her child onto her lap. The infant stirred, pressing its tiny fingers against her chest. Then Emma did something that made the room hold its breath again. She began to hum, a low, rolling murmur that wasn't loud, but carried easily through the space. It wasn't the sharp bark of warning or the short grunts of irritation the staff sometimes heard. This was different. Softer, rhythmic, almost like a lullaby. Most of the onlookers wouldn't have noticed the significance. To them, it may have seemed like any other sound a gorilla might make. But Tom knew. He knew every sound Emma had ever made. And this was her voice when no one was watching. When she sat alone in the evenings, rocking herself in the shadows after the lights were dimmed, it was the voice she used in mourning, in memory. And now she was using it in front of someone. For someone. She was telling her story. 5 years ago, Emma had lost her first baby. It had been a sudden illness, a silent infection that crept in and left the staff helpless. The infant was gone within hours. And Emma had collapsed in the corner and held the tiny body for 3 full days. She refused food. She turned her face from the keepers. At night, she made a sound no one had heard before, a long, guttural cry that vibrated in the walls like the echo of something ancient and broken. Tom remembered it vividly. It had been one of the hardest weeks of his career, not because of the loss, but because of the look in her eyes. She had mourned like a mother, not an animal, a mother. And now, all these years later, she sat before a man who had buried his own child. The two of them, separated by glass and species and language, met in the one place where none of that mattered: shared grief. One had been spared this time, the other had not. And somehow, they both knew it. As the clock ticked forward and the quiet stretched longer, a security guard finally stepped forward and gently approached Frank's side. "Sir," he said in a voice barely above a whisper, "I'm sorry, but visiting hours—" Frank didn't turn. He didn't even blink. His hand rose slightly from the railing, trembling only a little. "Just 1 more minute," he said. "Please, we're talking." The guard nodded and stepped back without another word, because everyone in that room understood something sacred was happening. This wasn't a man watching a gorilla. This wasn't a zoo exhibit. This was a conversation, a wordless confession between 2 souls who had stood at the same edge of loss and somehow survived it. For the first time in weeks, perhaps months, Frank felt seen, not pitied, not managed, not gently ushered toward distraction. Seen, understood, not by a counselor, not by a friend, but by a mother who had once laid her child down and waited for a heartbeat that never returned. And now, as she cradled a new life, she offered that memory back to him, not in sorrow, but in solidarity. And Frank, eyes locked on hers, breathed a little deeper. Later that afternoon, in the quiet break room tucked behind the primate center, Tom sat with 2 of his colleagues. His voice was soft, almost reverent. "That wasn't an animal showing off her baby," he said. "That was a mother showing a friend." No one responded. They didn't need to. The truth had already settled into the room like sunlight through old glass. When Frank returned home, his neighbor, Mrs. Banks, spotted him on the porch and paused. "You look taller today," she said gently. "What happened?" Frank smiled, not with his mouth, but with something in his eyes. "I saw something," he said. "Love, the kind that stays, even when everything else is gone." A week later, an envelope arrived at the zoo. Inside was a handwritten letter. The handwriting was shaky, but strong. "Dear Emma," it read, "thank you. I didn't know I could still breathe. But you showed me. I can, I must. For her, for all of us. Tom framed the letter and placed it near Emma's enclosure. Now, when visitors came and watched her cradle her baby, they paused a little longer. They read the words, they looked again, and many wept. Because in that space, between glass and straw, between silence and memory, two hearts had met, not as man and gorilla, but as souls. And for anyone paying attention, it became clear, sometimes even in the quietest moments, life reaches out and takes your hand.